Welcome back. At this session, we're going to take a look at a very important topic. It's called God's prescription. And in order to get a better understanding of what we're looking at, I'd like to share a little video.
There once was a town called Allopath. It had many people, streets, and cars. But due to budget limitations, there were no stop signs.
We just keep going, pedal to the meadow.
Not surprisingly, traffic accidents were common.
Look out!
Cars would crash into each other at nearly every intersection.
Did I do that? Oh, boy.
As the population of Allopath grew, traffic accidents increased to an alarming level.
I've been in another accident. That's 3 today.
Out of desperation, the city council hired Dr. West, a doctor of the motor division, MD, to find a solution. Dr. West spent days examining traffic accidents on an hourly rate.
I see. Looks lucrative. Must analyze.
The townspeople of Allopath watched on with great curiosity while Dr. West went about his work.
This guy's good. What's he doing?
After weeks of investigations, Dr. West called the people of Allopath to a town meeting for release of his report.
Here it is. Traffic accidents are caused by skid marks. I have found and documented a near 100% correlation between traffic accidents and skid marks.
Whoa.
This town has skid marks disease. Why didn't I think of that?
I could have thought of it with my brain.
Thank you, thank
It's amazing.
Colossal, stupendous, fantastic, and he's good, too.
The city paid Dr. West his consulting fee, then asked the good doctor to propose a method for treating this skid marks disease.
I recommend a particular chemical coating, Teflon.
Teflon.
Teflon!
Oh, no, Teflon.
The city immediately placed a large order with the chemical company that manufactured Pharmaceuticals. Within weeks, the streets were completely coated and the skid marks all but disappeared. But things weren't well in the Hilton. Traffic accidents quadrupled. Hospital beds were overflowing with injured residents. The town economic advisor, observing the sharp increase in economic activity, announced that Allopath was booming.
Times are good.
Things are great, except that we're getting creamed.
But the traffic accidents continued to increase. And yet, there were no skid marks.
Not again. It keeps happening. I thought we had this figured out.
We gotta get to the bottom of this.
Well, the city council was baffled. They thought they had solved this problem.
You said it!
They called a town meeting, and following a short discussion of the problem,
Hey, who's that old guy?
an old hermit who lived in the forest just outside Allopath addressed the townspeople.
Who's that old guy?
There's no such thing as skid marks disease.
No skid marks disease? Outrageous!
This disease was invented by the Pharmaceuticals company to sell you Teflon coatings. That's crazy talk. This is a simple problem. All we need to do is build stop signs and traffic lights. Then the traffic accidents will cease.
Crazy.
You must take up the Teflon.
That's a lunatic.
He's a nut. A big nut.
Preposterous!
The townspeople were horrified to hear such a statement.
Personally, I'm horrified to hear such a statement.
They knew skid marks disease existed. Dr. West had told them so. But what may happen if stop signs actually work?
How will that affect our booming economy in Allopath?
It was at that moment that most of the townspeople realized their own jobs were at stake. If stop signs were built, nearly everyone would be unemployed.
Yeah, what about them?
We'll all lose our livelihoods!
They all had jobs in emergency response services, car repair shops, hospitals, and Teflon coating maintenance. It was important that everyone continued to believe that skid marks disease was the cause of the accidents. Out of fear of losing this economic prosperity, the townspeople voted to create a new public safety agency, the Frequent Drivers Association. The FDA's board members were chosen from among the business leaders of the community, the owner of the car shop, the owner of the ambulance company, and, of course, Dr. West. Soon after its inception, the FDA announced that skid marks disease was indeed very real.
Skid marks!
People who promote stop signs are quacks.
Pay the cost.
This pleased the townspeople of Allopath. With the FDA, they knew their jobs were safe.
Signs. Stop signs.
They still had a lot of traffic accidents, but at least their jobs were secure. And so life continued in Allapath. For a short while, at least. As traffic accidents continued at a devastating rate, more and more residents of Allapath were injured. Many were left unable to work due to their injuries. In time, population dwindled. The once booming town of Allapath eventually became little more than a ghost town. No one was any healthier or happier or longer lived. And the hermit? He outlived every single resident of Allapath. In his spare time, he constructed stop signs, waiting for the next population to come along and hoping they might listen to an old hermit with a crazy idea.
And that so-called crazy idea is simply this. The mere treatment of symptoms is not the answer. When it comes to your health and well-being, looking and feeling younger, avoiding diseases, increasing your energy, and living a long and fulfilling life, prevention and real cure are the only real answer.
Does that help you understand the process that we're dealing with today? It's kind of a funny little video, but it kind of shows you where our priorities are. We see here the toxic pill and surgery line. We see the lifestyle change line. We don't see a lot of people just jumping at the chance to go do lifestyle. And maybe it's because it's lack of information. Maybe it's because that's the way they were trained. Maybe it's because this is what the insurance pays for. But as we look at outcome indicators, when I changed from allopathic care, doing that for 20 years, and as I saw the outcome indicators, when folks were doing lifestyle, I wanted better outcome indicators. So I went from the allopathic administration side to the lifestyle side, and I found much better outcome indicators. Again, for 20 years, I'd never seen reversal of cardiovascular, say, ejection fraction. And then in lifestyle health, we see huge improvement in ejection fraction. We see huge improvement in cardiovascular health. We see total reversal of diabetes. In the first 20 years, I never saw one case of reversal of diabetes. It was all in the patient care plan. It was also always diabetic management through pharmaceutical. And then we see 98 or more % reversal rate. More many times than 98% reversal rate of type 2 diabetes. We see type 1 diabetes where folks come in with, they may be on 60, 80 units of insulin, go to maybe 5. That's not uncommon. As we look at that, it requires lifestyle change. And many times people just are not willing to make those lifestyle changes. Whether it's appetite, whether it's exercise, whether it's rest, those issues of lifestyle. Many times those are lifestyle diseases. Prescription drug use is increasing rapidly. Between 1997 and 2016, the number of prescriptions filled in the United States rose from about 2.4 billion to over 4.4 billion, or by about 85%. Top 10 prescribed drugs in 2018: Lipitor, levothyroxine, lisinopril, amlodipine, losartan, amoxicillin, hydrocodone, acetaminophen, Adderall, prednisone, and metformin. One of the problems we see when we use pharmaceuticals are side effects, adverse drug reactions. And many times people are afraid of natural things because there may be adverse reactions. And that's a normal thing. People ask me, well, if I take this, is there going to be an adverse reaction? And we'll talk about that a little more. But what about with pharmaceuticals? Do we see adverse drug reactions? An adverse drug reaction is an injury caused by taking medication. ADRs may occur following a single dose or prolonged administration of a drug, or result from the combination of 2 or more drugs. The meaning of this expression differs from the meaning of side effects. So it's a little different than side effects. An adverse drug event refers to any injury occurring at the time of the drug use. Again, this comes from guidelines for good clinical practice. So what do we learn here? Why learn about adverse drug reactions, ADR? Over 2 million serious ADRs a year. Over 100,000 deaths a year. ADR's fourth leading cause of death ahead of pulmonary, diabetes, and AIDS. And you'll see maybe something, maybe even higher than that. Ambulatory patient ADR rate is unknown. Nursing home patients' ADR rate is about 350,000 per year. That's if it has been recorded. Those are the ones that are documented, recorded. The cost associated with ADRs, approximately $136 billion a year, greater than total cost of cardiovascular or diabetic care. Amazing. Isn't that, let's look at this. The cost of adverse drug reactions, $136 billion a year. It's greater than the total cost of cardiovascular disease or diabetic. That's tremendous. ADRs cause 1 out of 5 injuries or deaths per year to hospitalized patients. Mean length of stay, cost, and mortality for ADR patients are double that of control patients. Why are there so many ADRs? 2/3 of the patients visit in result of a prescription. It's due, 2/3 is due to taking the medication. 2.8 billion outpatient prescriptions, or 10% of the persons in the United States, filled in 2000. ADRs increase exponentially with 4 or more medications. So it just doesn't 1, then double 2, then or whatever that amount is. When it goes more than 4, it exponentially starts increasing because you're having issues there. Antibiotic resistance. This is from the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Disease Division of Bacterial Diseases. Antibiotic resistance has been called one of the world's most pressing public health problems. Over the last decade, almost every type of bacteria has become stronger and less responsive to antibiotic treatment when it is really needed. The antibiotic resistance bacteria can quickly spread to family members, schoolmates, and co-workers, threatening the community with a new strain of infectious disease that is more difficult to cure and more expensive to treat. For this reason, antibiotic resistance is among CDC's top concerns. It was a number of years ago. It was in probably the mid-1990s. I was walking down the hallway with our chief physician, and we were talking, and he said, "Walt, I want to see every order that is written for antibiotics." Now, we had a number of physicians. And I said, "Why do you want that?" Because you're going to make a bunch of folks mad. You're looking over the shoulder for that. Looking at every single order for the antibiotic that's written. He said, "Walt," he said, "we are using cannons when a BB gun would work. We're using cannons when a BB gun would work." He said, "If we don't change this quickly, soon we're going to have what's called huge infections, which now today we call them superbugs." That gentleman passed away as an older physician about to retire. He saw the future of what was going on as he saw these superbugs movement. We're seeing that right here. Upper respiratory infections account for 3/4 of all antibiotic prescriptions or antibiotics prescribed by office-based physicians. Upper respiratory infections account for 3/4 of all antibiotics prescribed by office-based prescriptions. More than 10 million courses of antibiotics are prescribed each year for what? viral conditions that do not benefit from antibiotics, according to the CDC. More than 10 million courses, not doses, courses. So how much more? I don't know. Why do physicians write a prescription for an antibiotic for viruses? Because you ask for it. Because you pressure them to. Because people they feel they got to have a pill to get better. That's what the docs tell me. Our antibiotic resistant bacteria is a public health crisis, according to State Hygiene Laboratory at the University of Iowa. Take a look at this. Johns Hopkins, in their research, has found that the third leading cause of death in the United States is what? Medical errors. Let's see what they say. Johns Hopkins patient safety experts have calculated that more than 250,000 deaths per year are due to medical error in the United States. Right now we're worried about 100,000 folks dying, rightfully so. We spent a whole bunch of money and a whole lot of systems put in place. This one right here, over double that amount right now. The Johns Hopkins team says the CDC's way of collecting national health statistics fails to classify medical errors separately on the death certificate. The researchers are advocating more up-to-date criteria for classifying deaths on death certificates. So what are they saying right now? They're saying there that it's a good chance, a lot more than that, because we're not collecting the data saying this was the cause of death. We'll put another diagnosis, they died, but this could be the cause of death, is our hypothesis. The newly calculated figure for medical errors puts this cause of death behind cancer, but ahead of respiratory disease. Top 8 causes of death in the United States in 2017. That's the most current that I have access to right now. We're a few years behind, usually collecting data. But as I looked again just a few minutes ago, the latest thing that the CDC has is 2017. Here's the top. 647,457 people die in the United States each year of heart disease. 647,000. That's a mess of people. Cancer, almost 600,000. But look at this. Over 250,000 die from medical error, according to Johns Hopkins. Next, almost 170,000 with accidents, unintended injuries. 160,000 chronic lower respiratory disease. 146,000 from strokes. 241,404 by Alzheimer's disease. Diabetes, 83,564,000 die each year from complications of diabetes. But this really bothers me, this right here. A medical error is a preventable adverse effect of care. Did you hear that? A medical error is a preventable adverse effect of care. Whether or not it is evident or harmful to the patient, this might include an inaccurate or incomplete diagnosis or treatment of a disease, injury, syndrome, behavior, infection, or ailment. This is a medical error. Medication errors. Food Drug Administration estimates that 1.3 million people are injured by medication errors annually in the United States. 1.3 million people a year are injured, not that they just had a medication error, but they're actually injured. The injury could be minor to death. Side effects. A side effect is usually regarded as an undesirable secondary effect which occurs in addition to the desired therapeutic effect of a drug or a medication. That's what we usually hear about, side effects. Side effects may vary for each individual depending on the person's disease state, their age, weight, gender, ethnicity, and general health. Side effects can occur when commencing, decreasing, increasing dosage, or ending a drug or medication regimen. Many side effects of medication may not be reported. This is according to drugs.com. Many side effects of medication may not be reported. I remember one time I was at Loma Linda, and I was speaking on this subject just outside. I was at a meeting just outside of Loma Linda there, and we had a lot of the students coming and staff. And I remember when I talked about this, they said, oh, I was talking about what we're going to talk about, the drugs, the problems with drugs. And they said, there's not the side effects of drugs today. They said, like back in the 1800s, early 1900s, those drugs were dangerous. But the drugs today are very safe. And I asked them, do you have this book here? Physician's Desk Reference. Oh, yes. Does this book talk about side effects? Yes, serious side effects. They didn't say anything. Or how about this one? PDR, Physician's Desk Reference, Guide to Drug Interactions, Side Effects, and Indications. So this is a book for physicians, medical staff, on a guide to drug interactions, side effects, and indications, and if it was not a problem, they would not have written this book. Serious side effects of commonly prescribed drugs include cancer, death, heart disease, infection, kidney damage, liver damage, pancreatitis, strokes, suicide. Serious side effects of commonly prescribed drugs: cancer, death, heart issues, infection, kidney disease, liver damage, pancreatitis, and stroke, and suicide. Why do I repeat that? I want it to sink in. Serious side effects. Why? What does it come from? Drug Watch. Common side effects of commonly prescribed drugs: nausea, diarrhea, rash, yeast infection, fever, weight gain, insomnia, nervousness, drowsiness, weakness, sweating, vomiting. When a person comes in and presents a health problem, one of the things you want to first do is rule out, could it be a side effect of medication? And you could be just chasing down the wrong rabbit hole. Many times when I worked in healthcare, the staff would stack medication. This side effect, so you give something here, you give this, you give this. And finally, I remember on our psych patients, it would get so wobbly, we'd send them to the psych hospital, we'd take them down to zero and rebuild them back up again because they were so messed up because of, we just stacked everything on there. Common side effects of commonly prescribed drugs: nosebleed, nasal irritation, heartburn, fatigue, dizziness, drowsiness, chest pain, loss of appetite, leg pain, constipation, bloating, tinnitus. Let's take a look and look at God's approach. The gospel and the medical missionary work are to advance together. The gospel is to be bound up with the principles of true health reform. And we're talking about true health in several of our programs on this series. So if there is true health reform, do you think there might be false? Possibly so. And as we talked earlier, we talked about education. We know there's true education, but is there false education? Our ministers should be intelligent upon this question. They should not ignore it, nor be turned aside by those who call them extremists. Let them find out what constitutes true health reform and teach its principles both by precept and by a quiet, conscious example. And we're kind of overdoing again. I like repeating some quotes because it etches it in our mind a little more. God desires that now, as never before, the minds of the people shall be deeply stirred to investigate the great temperance question and the principles underlying true health reform. And we talked about how do we know if this is a real $100 bill or not a real $100 bill. You have to test it. You know the true first. Then you'll know the false. And how do we know that in health? We look at these books. We look at the Ministry of Healing, Counsels on Diet and Foods, Temperance, Medical Ministry, Mind, Character, and Personality. The true method for healing the sick is to tell them of the herbs that grow for the benefit of man. Our scientists have attached large names to these simple preparations, but true education will lead us to teach the sick that they need not to call a doctor any more than they would call a lawyer. They can themselves administer the simple herbs if necessary. Now, I'm not saying that we need to do away with doctors or nurses. I'm not saying that we don't go to them. Diagnostics is tremendous. Oversight can be very beneficial. If you watch our series, God's Systematic Healthcare System, you'll understand how God places those physicians in His healthcare system. But I know people who just go to the doctor for every little thing. I had an aunt here, near here. And if you went to visit her with a health problem, if you went to visit her and you had a health problem, all of a sudden she had it. And she had to go see her doctor, and it usually was up at Mayo Clinic. There are those people out there who they get the slightest hangnail and they go see their doctor. And that's what it's talking about here. If you got a stuffy nose, take some garlic. Take some oil of oregano. Take some colloidal silver. There's plenty of things that you can use in those simple herbs. To educate the human family that the doctor alone knows all the ills of infants and persons of every age is false teaching. Let me read that again. I want to be very clear here. To educate the human family that the doctor alone knows all the ills of infants and persons of every age is false teaching. Dr. Ben Carson, if not the best neurosurgeon in the world, one of definitely the best. And Ben Carson has said the more he studies the brain, the more he doesn't understand the brain. So if your doctor tells you he knows everything, and they usually don't today, it's false teaching here. And the sooner we as a people stand on the principles of health reform, the greater will be the blessings that will come to those who would do true medical work. True medical work. There is a work to be done in treating the sick with water and teaching them to make the most of sunshine and physical exercise. Thus, in simple language, we may teach the people how to preserve health, how to avoid sickness. This is the work our sanitariums are called upon to do. This is true science. And you know, it's interesting. True science is a huge thing going on right now. That's a very popular saying. The true science is saying this, or science is saying this. And we're actually seeing, boom, the next day, science is saying 180 degrees something different. But what does God say here in pH 144, 13.6? This is true science. There are simple herbs and roots that every family may use for themselves and need not call a physician any sooner than they would call a lawyer. Again, that comparison. We had confidence in the use of water as God's appointed remedies, but no confidence in drugs. And again, this is where the students at Loma Linda were telling me, but Walt, you don't understand. These drugs here, they were bad drugs back then. Our drugs are different today, totally safe. There are many simple herbs which, if our nurses would learn the value of, they could use in the place of drugs and find very effective. I really enjoy going to Mayo Clinic and research, going to Harvard University and research, Johns Hopkins somewhat. If you want to, there's some really good research at Cleveland Clinic on natural treatments, natural remedies. NIH has a lot of information on natural remedies. Lancet over in Europe has a lot of information. Those of y'all in Europe, Lancet has a great resource on research, true science on natural remedies. In the Savior's manner of healing, there were lessons for His disciples. On one occasion, He anointed the eyes of a blind man with clay and bade him go wash in the pool of Siloam. He went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. The cure could be wrought only by the power of the great healer. Yet Christ made the use of the simple agencies of nature. Now it's interesting here. Let's go back and look. We need to pay attention to what we're reading here. The cure could be wrought only by the power of the great healer. That's the only way a cure happens. It is not drugs that heal. If they use drugs and there's healing, God is the one that did the healing, not the drugs. And as we see here, it was not the clay that healed. It was Christ that healed, but what does it say? While He did not give countenance to drug medication, He sanctified the use of simple and natural remedies. So, if God has identified true health, has He also identified false health? Let's look. The light given me was that a sanitarium should be established. The light given me from God, that a sanitarium should be established, and that in it medication should be discarded, and simple, rational methods of treatment employed for the healing of disease. In this institution, people were to be taught how to dress, breathe, eat properly, and how to prevent sickness by proper habits of living. Now, does that mean that we don't use hospitals? Oh, we need hospitals. Does that mean we don't use any drugs? Well, we're going to talk about that. Do we need the use of some drugs? The answer is yes. And we'll understand that a little more in a few minutes. The Lord has taught us that great efficacy for healing lies in the proper use of water. These treatments should be given skillfully. We have been instructed that in our treatment of the sick, we should discard the use of drugs. Now that does not mean that immediately we stop all drugs. If you're on Lanoxin, do not stop Lanoxin immediately. That can be very dangerous. If you're a type 1 diabetic, does that mean you stop taking your insulin? No. Even a type 2 diabetic or someone with hypertension, do you just plumb stop? No. We'll talk about that. There are simple herbs that can be used for the recovery of the sick, whose effect upon the system is very different from that of those drugs that poison the blood and endanger life. Those who make a practice of taking drugs sin. Those who make a practice of taking drugs sin against their intelligence and endanger their whole afterlife. There are herbs that are harmless, and the use of which will tide over many apparently serious difficulties. But if all would seek to become intelligent in regard to their body's necessities, sickness would be rare instead of common. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What is it saying here? What's it saying? There are herbs that are harmless, the use of which will tide over many apparently serious difficulties. But if all would seek to become intelligent in regard to their body's necessities, using lifestyle, sickness would be rare instead of common. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years ago, I was so sick, my gastroenterologist told me I was going to die. I was on a number of medications for a number of health issues, from asthma to ulcerative colitis. I was common to visit my physician. It was common for me to take medication. And when I changed my lifestyle in 1999, my body started to heal. And by May of 2000, I was off all drugs. I have gone 20 years now. The only medication I have used in 20 years as if I went to a dentist to numb my tooth. I'm okay with that. It was interesting, I was going through Chickamauga Battlefield, not far from here. I used to live in Fort Oglethorpe. And Mary Lou and I, one afternoon on the weekend, was over there, we were walking, and I used to enjoy going to the battlefield and walk. And we were over there walking, and they were having a reenactment. And so I went up to Snodgrass Hill. Snodgrass Hill is the last battle that the South won before the major battle they won before Atlanta. On Snodgrass Hill, right beside Snodgrass Hill, is the Snodgrass House. It's the home of Mr. and Mrs. Snodgrass, where they raised their family. And the South took that house and used it as a field hospital. The house is still standing today. And so Mary Lou and I went into the house to see what they did for a hospital. I was working in healthcare, and I thought, well, what did they use back in the 1860s? So on the kitchen table, there was 4 items. There was a black bag, a doctor's bag. There was a saw about this long with really fine teeth. I knew what that was for. Amputations. And then there was a bottle of liquor. I knew what that was for. Disinfecting and, killing any germs and maybe the patient drinking. But the 4th item, I didn't know what it was. And so I asked the man, what's that ball-peen hammer for? There's a little ball-peen hammer. He said that's when the liquor don't work. They would hit him in the head and knock him out. Now the patient not only has a bullet wound or a wound from a cannon or a bayonet wound, now they got a subdural hematoma. So there is times that we need something that's probably better than a subdural hematoma by getting licked in the head or drinking alcohol. So a painkiller for something like, if they're working on your tooth, might be a good idea. You also want to use an anesthetic when you go in for surgery. If you go driving home today, and when you drive home, you have a motor vehicle accident or crash, and you have a compound fracture, and they need to go in and do surgery, it might be a good idea to use anesthesia while they fix that compound fracture. So we'll talk a little about that. But if all would seek to become intelligent in regard to their body's necessities, sickness would be rare instead of common. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And what is that prevention? Following lifestyle. It would have been better if, from the first, all drugs had been kept out of our sanitariums, and the use had been made of such simple remedies as found in pure water, pure air, sunlight, and some of the simple herbs growing in the field. These would be just as efficacious as the drugs, used under mysterious names and concocted by human science, and they would have no injurious effects in the system. In regard to the matter of prayer for the sick, many confusing ideas are advanced, and that's an issue out there today. One says, he who has been praying must walk out in faith, giving God the glory and making use of no remedies. If he is at a health institute, he should leave at once. And that is actually a wind of doctrine out there today. There are those out there today that say, if you have food poisoning and if you use activated charcoal, that's lack of faith. You should pray and Christ will heal you. If you're having problems with the lungs and you're having respiratory issues and you use mullein as a bronchial dilator or eucalyptus essential oil as a bronchial dilator so you can breathe better, that's a lack of faith. You should use no natural remedies and only pray and God will take care of you. That is not what God teaches in the Bible or in inspiration. I know that these ideas are wrong and that if accepted, they would lead to many evils. And I'm seeing that today in movements that are believing this way. Satan's always going to be messing with stuff. You know what I'm talking about? If he can pull you over here, pull you over there, he don't care which ditch you're in, just as long as you are in a ditch. It is no denial of faith to use rational remedies judiciously. We're continuing on here. Water, air, sunshine, these are God's healing agencies. It's not a denial of faith if we use natural remedies. Do we still pray? Absolutely, because it is prayer. It is Christ healing, the asking through prayer that Christ bless these herbs or whatever remedy you use for healing. It is Christ that blesses those and causes healing. The use of certain herbs that the Lord has made to grow for the good of man is in harmony with the exercise of faith. It's very clear. Then shall physicians continue to resort to drugs which leave a deadly evil in the system, destroying that life which Christ came to restore. Wow. Then shall physicians continue to restore to drugs which leave a deadly evil in the system, destroying the life which Christ came to restore. Christ's remedies cleanse the system, but Satan has tempted man to introduce into the system that which weakens the human machinery, clogging and destroying the fine, beautiful arrangements of God. The drugs administered to the sick do not restore, but destroy. Drugs never cure. Instead, they place in the system seeds which bear a very bitter harvest. Do you see anything there? The origin of the use of drugs? If we use drugs, what are we following? But Satan has tempted man to introduce into the system that which weakens the human machinery, clogging and destroying the fine, beautiful arrangements of God. That is very clear, y'all. How do we work? How do we approach this? How do we apply this? We have to be very careful. Very careful. There are more who die from the use of drugs than all who would have died of disease had nature been left to do her own work. What's that saying? There are more who would die from the use of drugs than all who would have died of disease had nature been left to do her own work. Now, did we see that just a little while ago? The third major cause of death in the United States was just that one aspect of drug utilization of drugs. It is the Lord's purpose that His method of healing without drugs shall be brought into prominence in every large city throughout our medical institutions. Parents sin not only against themselves in swallowing poison drugs or drug poisons, but they sin against their children. The violated state of the blood, the poison distributed through the system, the broken constitution, and various diseases. As a result of drug poisons, are transmitted to their offspring and left to them a wretched inheritance, which is another great cause of degeneracy of the race. Several years ago, I was home sleeping in bed and tones dropped. There was a lady not far from us, up in the mountains, that her daughter, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, her daughter had gone into the bathroom to go to the bathroom, and she found her mother unresponsive on the bathroom floor. She was old enough to call 911, and we responded. I got there, and the lady was plumb out. She had a pulse. She was breathing. She was unresponsive to painful stimuli. I gave her some stuff that woke her up, and she became violent. I mean, crazy. We put her on a stretcher, took her down to the local hospital, and it took 3 of us to hold her down. I actually took the straps off of, we normally put patients in straps on them so they don't fall in the floor as the ambulance is driving down the road around curves. We strap them in 3 locations to hold them into the cot, the stretcher. I took the legs off because she was so powerful, just moving. It was ripping the skin on her legs. And so I just held as well as I could. Someone else was on the abdominal region, another person holding her shoulders. We got to the emergency room. Wheeled her in, crazy. The emergency room doc said, I'm not dealing with this. Intubate her, put her out, ship her to Knoxville. Fortunately, that's what they did. See, here's what happened. Previous to this, she'd gone into to see them with just some leg pain. She was having restless leg syndrome. And what did the doctor there do? He said, here's some painkillers. This will take care of that pain that your legs are having. The lady got hooked on them. She became an addict. They told me at UT that if the daughter had not found her, she probably would have died, according to the staff at University of Tennessee Med Center. While she was at UT, they found the actual root cause is she had a potassium deficiency. That's why her legs were hurting. 75% of that restless leg issue is magnesium deficiency. Number 2 is dehydration. Number 3 is potassium. Number 4 is iron deficiency. The doctors there in the town I'm from did not check her for magnesium issues, potassium issues, dehydration, or iron. They just gave her the painkiller. It almost killed her because she got hooked on it. And that's a chance that you have in those type of drugs. Fortunately, she was shipped to UT. In UT, the physicians there did much better research and found all it was is a potassium deficiency. Every time I see that lady, she comes up and hugs me because we got her out of that bad situation. See, she didn't need those drugs anymore. She got off of those drugs, and she's very happy. People need to be taught that drugs do not cure disease. It is true that they sometimes afford present relief. It is true that they sometimes afford present relief, and the patient appears to recover as the result of their use. This is because nature has sufficient vital force to expel the poison and to correct the conditions that cause the disease. Interesting. Health is recovered in spite of the drug. But in most cases, a drug only changes the form and location of these diseases. Often the effect of the poison seems to be overcome for a time, but the results remain in the system and work great harm at some later point. By the use of poisonous drugs, many bring upon themselves lifelong illnesses, and many lives are lost that might be saved by the use of natural methods of healing. Let's look at that. By the use of poisonous drugs, many bring upon themselves lifelong illness, and many lives are lost that might be saved by the use of natural methods of healing. A number of years ago, my dad came and stayed with me, probably 10 years ago, and he stayed with me for 6 months. My mom had passed away, Dad came and stayed with me. And during that 6 months, he found by doing natural methods, he was able to get rid of most of his meds. By his choice is why he came to do this. I remember 6 months later, we took him to, at the end of the 6 months, I took him back to Nashville to his cardiologist. And so Dad had to do some paperwork, wanting to know what meds he was taking at the time, what the dosage was, and what all was going on. And when we went in and sat down with the cardiologist looked and he said, "Mr. Cross, I noticed that you're not taking all these cardiac medications." "No, sir. And I'm doing a whole lot better." He said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm just doing natural things." He said, "Mr. Cross, we don't do natural here. We only do pharmaceuticals. And if you're going to use this office, you have to use the drugs, the pharmaceuticals." We got up as we left, went out. I said, "Dad, I think it's time for you to get another cardiologist." Medicines have no power to cure, but will most generally hinder nature in her efforts. Medications have no power to cure, but will most generally hinder nature in her efforts. Break down vital forces. Drugs always have a tendency to break down and destroy vital forces. The liver, heart, and brain are frequently affected by drugs, and often these organs are burdened with disease and the unfortunate subjects, if they live, are invalids for life, wearingly dragging out a miserable existence. Drugs always have a tendency to break down and destroy vital forces, and nature becomes so crippled in her efforts that the invalid dies. Not because he needed to die, but because nature was outraged. If she had been left alone, she would have put forth her highest efforts to save life and health. Nature wants none of such help as so many claim that they have given her. Lift off the burdens placed upon her after the customs of the fashion of this age, and you will see in many cases nature will right herself. Several months ago, I went with a friend of mine. Well, actually, it was quite a while ago. I went with a friend of mine to the oncology department at the major university. She has cancer throughout her body. And so the oncologist said, and I was really impressed by this lady because she didn't push her to take her chemo or to take radiation. She said, "I'm here to advise you, and you need to make a decision. You need to make an informed decision on what you'd like to do. And I'll support you whichever way you choose." I was impressed. So we were talking about the choices of chemotherapy. And I said, "Do you mind if I ask a couple questions?" She says, "No." I said, would you say my friend is imminent? She said, yes. My friend looked, and what's imminent? She said, you could easily die within 6 months. I said, if she does the chemotherapy, will it cure the cancer? She says, no, it won't cure the cancer. I said, tell me, what will the chemotherapy do? She said, hopefully it will just make life easier for her in this 6 months. Hopefully. My friend chose not to use the chemotherapy, and she's still alive today, and she's in much better health than she was near a year ago. Another friend called me, and she said, my sister has cancer. Her sister and I were classmates. She says, you need to call her. And I called her, and this friend of mine, who's a physician, had significant cancer. Significant cancer. It was in January, a year and a half ago. And her oncologist told her that if they threw everything at her, she would not last till June. Maybe June, definitely she would not see July. And she said, Walt, I need to stay alive for my family. So I sent her a list of things to look at. And she looked at them, she called me back, and she said, Walt, what do I need to do? I said, I don't know. What you need to do is you need to pray and ask God to have the Holy Spirit impress upon you which one of those to do. I said, okay. She's a very religious lady, spends a lot of time in prayer. She called me back. She says, Walt, I'm impressed. I need to do this. Tell me what I need to do. So I shared with her how to do these items. By March, she was doing better. The middle of June, now she was supposed to not last through the end of June. The middle of June, they did an MRI, a CT, and a PET scan. And they found no cancer anywhere. And she was eaten up with cancer. The last week of June, the surgeon said, I've got to go in and do some radical removal of this area of the body. And she said, why? And he said, the type of cancer you have is so dangerous. We've just got to take this area away from you. And she says, I believe God healed me. He says, we have to do something. She says, here's what we'll do. Go ahead and go in. Explore. If you see something, take care of it. But if you don't see anything, just sew me up and leave me alone. So the last week of June, a year ago, he went in and he looked in 3 major areas, extensively looked, exploratory. He could only find perfect cells, perfect tissue. He honored his word, closed her up. A year later, she's still doing very, very well. Now, I told my friend, I said, it is God that does the healing, not these natural remedies. But I promise you, I can guarantee you that you'll have 100% healing if you do 4 things. And she said, what? Number 1, and this is what I tell most every person who comes to me with cancer. If you accept Jesus as your Savior every day, not just when you're 8 years old, if you become really, really, really good friends with Him, When he comes back, he won't say, I don't know you. But if you spend time with him all day, through walking with him through the day, spending time with him, reading, I know her. I know him. If you've done something wrong, ask for forgiveness. If you've done something wrong to somebody, and they're there, ask them. Definitely ask God to forgive you. And number 4, read the Bible. If it says to do something, do it. If it says don't do it, don't do it. And I said the Bible promises that you will have 100% healing. It doesn't say it's going to be right now. It's when God decides it's going to be right now. See, I've got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old grandchild. And there's times that they will say, Granddaddy, why? I just can't tell them why. You know, they're just not old enough to understand. Just trust me, young'un. Sometimes God just has to say, trust me, young'un. Because we're like that 4-year-old and that 5-year-old. We just don't understand why God makes His decisions. Why my wife, Mary Lou, He chose, 11, 12 years ago to heal her of breast cancer. Or why my friend, 1.5 years ago, she was, or a year ago, a little more than a year ago, was healed. And why another person, He lets them go to sleep. We don't know. It's where that relationship, having trust in God, is so important. But my friend chose not to go with the challenges of chemotherapy. Now, could God have healed her taking the chemotherapy? Absolutely. Now, the doctor said there was no way she was going to stay alive with the chemotherapy. God could have still used it. But as we read here today, we're finding there's challenges here. And we all know the challenges of chemo. I'm not saying don't use chemo. Talk to God and ask Him if you need to use chemo. A practice that is lying the foundation of a vast amount of disease and of even more serious evils is the free use of poisonous drugs. Do we see the free use of poisonous drugs? I remember years ago when I first got into healthcare, Tennessee, my home state. I started working here first. We had an average of 18 scripts per patient that we saw. 18 prescriptions per patient. Crazy. When attacked by disease, many will not take the trouble to search out the cause of their illness. Their chief anxiety is to rid themselves of pain and inconvenience. Find the cause. Rule out things. Find that cause, and it will fix it. Many, many times. The use of drugs is not favorable or natural to the laws of life and healing. The drug medication gives nature 2 burdens to bear in the place of 1. She has 2 serious difficulties to overcome in the place of 1. So, what is God's counsel? What does God want us to do? We looked at true health. We looked at false health. What does God want us to do? Those who desire to become missionaries are to hear instruction from competent physicians. Competent physicians. So if there's competent, there must be incompetent. Boy, whew, that's a hard one. Who will teach them how to care for the sick without the use of drugs. God's very plain here. Very strong God is. God has some strong words. Those who sin against knowledge and light and resort to the skill of a physician in administering drugs will be constantly losing their hold on life. The less there is of drug dosing, the more favorable will be their recovery to health. Drugs, in the place of helping nature, are constantly paralyzing her efforts. Now it's interesting as God tells us in the Bible. The Bible says in the commandments, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Period. Does it say someday I want you to change days of worship? It doesn't say that. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And it's the sixth day of the week. It says, thou shalt not lie. Does it say it's okay someday to lie? If it was, it would say so, wouldn't it? Does the Bible say, thou shalt have no other gods before me? But one day you can. Does the Bible say that you can steal? You can't steal, but someday you can do it. It'll be okay. No. The Bible says, don't do this. It's God's Word. When we look at inspiration, I would venture to say that most of our audience would believe this is inspired by God. What I'm sharing here is inspired by God. Now, if He tells you to do something, you're to do it. Period. If it's okay to do it later, He would tell us. Otherwise, we would be disobeying. Would you agree with that? Does that make sense, that line of thinking? There are many that I share this with in the medical community. Tell me that this information that we're looking at here today was only during that time. But that's not what God says here. He doesn't say only during this period of time. What I'm saying right now is what I want you to do. He's saying don't do it. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? In the work of healing, let physicians work intelligently, not with drugs, but following rational methods. God's using some strong words here. He's saying here, competent. He's saying here, let's see here, intelligently. Therefore, the opposite is in the work of healing. Let the physicians work intelligently, not with drugs, but by following rational methods. Then let them, by the prayer of faith, draw upon the power of God to stay the progress of disease. This will inspire in the suffering ones belief in Christ and the power of prayer. It will give them confidence in simple remedies of treating disease. Such work will be a means of directing minds to the truth and will be of great efficacy in the work of the gospel ministry. It's the right hand that opens the door and allows the gospel to walk through. Many physicians are not as thorough and intelligent as they should be in the practice of their profession. They resort to drugs when greater skill and knowledge would teach them a more excellent way. Lives have been lost which might have been saved if drugs had not been resorted to. As a rule, the less frequently they are employed, the better the patient will prosper. As a rule. The less frequently they are employed, the better the patient will prosper. When physicians understand physiology in its truest sense, their use of drugs will be very much less, and finally, they will cease to use them at all. The physician who depends on drug medication in his practice shows that he does not understand the delicate machinery of the human organism. Several years ago, this was presented at a large meeting with physicians. It was not accepted. It was not accepted. This slide is a very important slide. Let us dissect it. When physicians understand, it's a when statement. This is very important. Pay attention. When physicians understand physiology in its truest sense, I'll add then, their use of drugs will be very much less, and finally, they will cease to use them at all. When? When will this happen? When physicians understand physiology. We spend too much time studying pharmacology, and we need to spend far more time studying and researching physiology. Again, my first 20 years. We did not reverse diabetes. When I left corporate health, corporate told me I was crazy to go to a place that thought they could reverse diabetes. They told me I was crazy. And then I told them, I said, they're even seeing benefits in type 1 diabetes. And you know what they then told me? You're stupid. You are stupid because you cannot improve type 1 diabetes. Well, guess what? We had an average of 98% reversal of type 2 diabetes. Almost everybody who came in, it didn't matter if they were coming from Russia, Africa, Asia, New York City, Washington, D.C., wherever. In type 1s, we saw many of those come to just 5 units of insulin. That was the norm. 60 units, 80 units, and they would come to 5 units. Yeah, that's improving. So what's the difference? What is the difference in the first 20 years of my career and going to a place that saw this? It's because the physicians at this center that I went to understood physiology. And the physicians where I came from did not understand the physiology of type 2 diabetes. See, once you understand the cause, and there's 3 major things I have found that cause type 2 diabetes. And if we remove those 3 things, type 2 goes away. I just got back from Africa. In the fall, I was there. There was a lady who came in, and we did a lifestyle program of 2 weeks. We had all kinds of people there. We had ambassadors, we had physicians, we had very interesting people, PhDs. It was a different trip. Usually you think of going to Africa and going to the bush. This was the city and having some very well-to-do, educated people come. I had a person come in the fall. They came in, presented type 2 diabetic. They were on insulin. I don't remember the amount. They were on metformin, 1,000 milligrams twice a day. They had a blood sugar, entering blood sugar of 389. They had ambulatory issues. By the end of the program, 2 weeks later, their blood sugar was 124, no insulin, no metformin, and they were walking by themselves. When I went back 6 months later, this spring, she was still off any diabetic medications. She was also off her blood pressure medicine also. In the spring, where I just got back, we had a lady come in. She came in with, this time we had an Army general's wife come. We had the second in command for the Army come in, for the military, the whole military. The second in command came in and came through our course. We had the top World Health Organization position for that region come in and take our course. That's the kind of people we had. We had, again, 2 ambassadors that joined us. Physicians, nurses, We had a nutritionist who worked both for the World Health Organization and for the country in their Ministry of Health. Lady comes in. Again, major ambulatory issues. By the time she left, she was out doing this on her walks. Literally jogging like that. She came in with a blood sugar of 399, and in 2 weeks, she was on insulin, she was on metformin, and in 2 weeks, she had a blood sugar of 115. No insulin, no metformin. Why? We got rid of the 3 causes in just 2 weeks. When physicians understand physiology in its truest sense, their use of drugs will be very much less. Why? Because when they understand physiology, they can change what's going on in the body through natural means that God has given us, and they don't need the medication. Last year, I had 2 people come in. Both of them were stage 4 renal failure. One from University of Tennessee, renal group there, and one from Greenville. In 3 months, both of those folks, their physicians, one at UT at Knoxville, the other one in Greenville, their nephrologist said they had no more renal failure in 3 months. Why? This is what we addressed. Physiology. So what does this say? When physicians understand physiology in its truest sense, their use of drugs will be very much less. And finally, they will cease to use them at all. Now, for type 1, yes, we normally get them down to 5 units. Why don't we just take them plumb off? Because we don't fully understand physiology yet in type 1 to get them totally off the insulin. And because of that, they've got to take the least amount that will work. Until we understand fully, you have to leave them on the medication. Does that make sense? You just don't take a person off medication because it says, got to quit using meds. You can kill a person. So as we spend more time studying this, physiology, better research, better diving in to understand why. Not just saying, oh, you're a type 1 diabetic, we're going to give you X amount of insulin, we're going to control your blood sugar by insulin, we'll do sliding scale, we'll put you on a pump. We're spending our time managing that patient, masking that patient by using this, the drugs, and we're not continually to educate ourselves on this. What is the cause? We don't understand it all yet. We're still learning. But when we learn, and therefore we have a responsibility to continue diving into it, to try to figure out what's going on physiologically so we can get to here. It is true. A lot of times people come and they're totally off all medications. Because a lot of the presenting diseases out there that we're dealing with today, through lifestyle, from the simple use of remedial agencies, we're able to get them off the medications. The physician who depends on drug medication in his practice shows that he does not understand the delicate machinery of the human organism. What is that? He does not understand physiology to its truest. It's very clear. We have to be better today than yesterday, and we have to be better tomorrow than today. We cannot be just satisfied with what the drug rep tells us that we need to do today. We cannot be satisfied with what we've been doing for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years to mask and manage. We got to dig to better understand this so that we can get to God's goal of this. To take a person off medication immediately is not wise. Do you remember the little child that became sick? And the father, in reading this, chose not to use any medication. The child died. He later saw Mrs. White and he said, "Would I have sinned if I had used the medication at hand?" She says, "No." Why? They weren't here yet. Does that make sense? But because we're not here yet does not give us an excuse to do this. Each one of us, why I say each one of us? Because God has said that every member is to be a medical missionary. We all have to study physiology, especially physicians, nurses. Study this so we can get to here. The only hope of better things is in the education of people in the right principles. The only hope of better things is in the education of the people in the right principles. I have a friend, he's a physician. I asked him, I said, "What are your hobbies?" "I don't have any hobbies. My hobby is pharmacology. I spent my whole career studying the use of pharmaceuticals." Let physicians teach the people that restorative power is not in drugs, but in nature. Our physicians need to be teaching us the restorative power in nature. Not saying, "Just trust me, I'll write a script, they'll be okay. Send them to me, I'll take care of it, I'm the medical doctor." That is not what God's saying here. Let physicians teach the people, each of us, the medical missionaries, that restorative power is not in drugs, also their patients, but in nature. Drug medication is to be discarded. Drug medication is to be discarded. On this point, the conscience of a physician must ever be kept tender and true and clean. The inclination to the use of poisonous drugs, which kill if they do not cure, need to be guarded against. Matters have been laid open before me in reference to the use of drugs. Many have been treated with drugs, and the result has been death. Did we not see that earlier? Number 3 cause of death. Our physicians, by practicing drug medication, have lost many cases that need not have died if they had left their drugs out of the sick room. My friend, who's a physician, she would be dead right now, she believes, if she had just chose to use the system. And she's a physician. Prayer will give the sick an abiding confidence. This is very important. Prayer will give the sick an abiding confidence, and many times if their cases are borne to the great physician in humble trust, it will do more for them than all the drugs that can be administered. The ideal, finally, cease to deal out drugs. The ideal is to finally cease to deal out drugs. When you understand physiology in its truest sense, here it is again, the ideal. When you understand physiology in its truest sense, your drug bills will be very much smaller. And finally, you will cease to deal out drugs at all. The physician who depends upon drug medication in his practice shows that he does not understand the delicate machinery of the human organism, which before it showed us that is physiology. He is introducing into the system a seed crop that will never lose its destroying properties throughout the lifetime. I tell you this because I dare not withhold it. Christ paid too much for man's redemption to have His body so ruthlessly treated as it has been by drug medication. As to drugs being used in our institutions, it is contrary to the light which the Lord has been pleased to give. The drugging business has done more harm to our world and killed more than it has helped or cured. The light was first given me why institutions should be established. That is, sanitariums were to reform the medical practices of physicians. That was the goal. Reform the medical practice of physicians. Stop using the pharmaceuticals. Use natural remedies. But to do that, we must understand physiology. But to do that, we've got to study and continue drilling and looking and work as a team. The health retreat was established at a great cost to treat the sick without drugs. The health retreat was established at a great cost to treat the sick without drugs. It should be conducted on hygienic principles. So the patient care should be conducted on hygienic principles. Medication should be worked away from as fast as possible until entirely discarded. So our medical community, as quickly as possible, not whenever research might come. That means we need to study physiology. Continue drilling, looking, exploring. Medication should be worked away from as fast as possible until entirely discarded. We're not talking 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. Let's get on it. The question of health reform is not agitated as it must and will be. So we're not talking about this enough. We're not bringing it to the forefront enough. That's why we're talking about it today, because we're told we've got to bring it up. How do we know to correct things unless we know? I can tell you, I did not know this when I worked in regular health care. A simple diet, an entire abstinence of drugs, leaving nature free to recuperate the wasted energies of the body would make our sanitariums far more effectual in restoring the sick to health. Then, after years, the light was given that we should have a sanitarium, a health institute, which was to be established right among us. This was the means God was to use in bringing His people to a right understanding in regard to health reform. It was also to be the means by which we were to gain access to those not of our faith through our sanitariums, through our hospitals. We were to have an institution where the sick could be relieved of suffering, and that without drug medication. God declared that He Himself would go before His people in this work. So what do we need to do? We need to study physiology more so that we can use less and less dosing until we don't use it. How do we do that? Do we figure it out ourselves? Yes, we've got to look, but do we have a promise here? He Himself will go before His people in this work. That means God will show you what to do. If you ask Him to show you, how do we address this? How do we quit using these drugs? Do you believe God in His Word? You tell people you believe it. But do you believe it? Are you willing to step out there and say, okay, God, let's take them one by one. What do I need to do in this situation to stop using medication for my patients? Or what do I need to do, God, so that I quit having to use medication for myself or my children? Do it wisely. Institutions for the care of the sick are to be established where men and women suffering from disease may be placed under the care of God-fearing physicians and nurses and treated without drugs. Institutions for the care of the sick are to be established where men and women suffering from disease may be placed under the care of God-fearing physicians and nurses and be treated without drugs. I have been pained when many students have been encouraged to go where they would receive an education in the use of drugs. The light which I have received, this is inspired, on this subject of drugs is altogether different from the use made of them at the schools or at the sanitariums. We must become enlightened on these subjects. Special instruction should be given in the art of treating the sick without the use of poisonous drugs and in harmony with the light that God has given. Students should come forth from the school without having sacrificed the principles of health reform. And people say, well, we only have to worry about the poisonous drugs, but there's other places that say totally eliminate them. So it must be a lot of your drugs are poisonous. We must have medical instructors who will teach the science of healing without the use of drugs. It doesn't say we must have medical instructors who will teach the science of healing without the use of poisonous drugs. It says we must have medical instructors who will teach the science of healing without the use of drugs. We are to prepare a company of workers who will follow Christ's method. As children emerge from babyhood, great care should still be taken in educating their tastes and appetite. We've talked about appetite here, Satan's ultimate weapon. Often they are permitted to eat what they choose, when they choose, without reference to health. The pains and money so often lavished upon unwholesome dainties lead the youth to think that the highest object in life and that which yields the greatest amount of happiness is to be able to indulge the appetite. The result of this training is gluttony. Then comes sickness, which is usually followed by dosing with poisonous drugs. So who is at fault here? But they'll cry. They'll get upset. They won't like me. Parents, grandparents, we have a responsibility what the grandkids and the children get. And yes, my grandkids may get upset, but we've got to feed them healthy food. They'll get hungry, just like Honeybee. My dog got hungry. She started eating that checkerboard. There is a disposition with many parents to dose children perpetually with medication. They always have to have a supply on hand, and when any slight disposition is manifested, caused by overeating or exhaustion, the medicine is poured down their throats. And if that dose and that does not satisfy them, they send for the doctor. The child is drugged to death, and the parents console themselves that they have done all they could for their children and wonder why they must die when they did so much to save them. Upon the gravestone of such children should be written, died of drug medication. That's serious. God has formed laws which govern our constitutions, and these laws which He has placed in our being are divine, and for every transgression there is affixed a penalty, which must sooner or later be realized. The majority of diseases which the human family have been and still are suffering under, they have created by ignorance of their own organic laws. They seem indifferent in regard to the matter of health, and work perseveringly to tear themselves into pieces. And when broken down and debilitated in body and mind, send for the doctor and drug themselves to death. My dear friends, instead of taking a course to baffle disease, you're petting it and yielding to its power. Instead of taking a course to baffle disease, you're petting it and yielding to its power. You should avoid the use of drugs and carefully observe the laws of health. And if you regard your life, you should eat plain food, prepared in the simplest manner, and take more physical effort. Each member of the family needs the benefit of health reform, but drugging should be forever abandoned. Drugging should be forever abandoned. For while it does not cure any malady, it enfeebles the system, making it more susceptible to disease. Indulging in eating too frequently and too large quantities overtax the digestive organs and produce a feverish state in the system. The blood becomes impure, and then disease of various kinds occur. A physician is sent for who prescribes some drug which gives present relief, but does not cure the disease. It may change the form of disease, but the real evil is what? Increased how much? Tenfold. Nature was doing her best to rid the system of an accumulation of impurities, and could she have been left to herself, aided by common blessings of heaven, such as pure air, pure water, a speedy and safe cure would have been effected. Many are unwilling to put forth the needed effort to obtain a knowledge of the laws of life and the simple means to be employed for the restoration of health. They do not place themselves in right relation to life. When sickness is the result of their transgression of natural law, they do not seek to correct their errors, and when asked the blessing of God, but they resort to the physicians. If they recover health, they give the drugs and doctors all the honor. If they recover health, they give to drugs and doctors all the honor. They are ever ready to idolize human power and wisdom, seeming to know no other God than the Creator, dust and ashes. Do you see a challenge here, y'all? There's so many quotes here that tell us to stop using the drugs. The blessed heavenly sent water, skillfully applied, would quench the devouring flames. But it is set aside for poisonous drugs when water itself would do the job in this situation. We must cooperate with the chief of physicians, walking in all humility of mind before Him. Then the Lord will bless our earnest efforts to relieve suffering humanity. It is not by the use of poisonous drugs that this will be done, but by the use of simple remedies. And who prescribed that? The chief of physicians. We should seek to correct false habits and practices and teach the lessons of self-denial. The indulgence of appetite is the greatest evil with which we have to contend. We've learned that in this series, that Satan's ultimate weapon is what? Appetite. God does not see fit to answer prayers offered in behalf of such. Well, let me go back. This is interesting here. Those who will gratify their appetite and then suffer because of their intemperance have taken drugs to relieve them and may be assured that God will not interpose to save health and life, which are so recklessly periled. The cause has produced the effect. Many, as their last resort, follow the directions in the Word of God and request the prayers of the elders in the church for their restoration to health. Listen to this, y'all. God does not see fit to answer prayers offered in behalf of such, for He knows that they should be restored to health. They would again sacrifice it upon the altar of unhealthy appetite. And I have a hard time with this one. As I get up in church, and I have the prayer, and I have a stack of papers of where people in our church are sick with this or with that or with this. And I'm there to ask God to heal them, to bless them. And what does it say? God does not see fit to answer prayers offered in behalf of such, for He knows that if they should be restored to health, they would again sacrifice it upon the altar of an unhealthy appetite. Is that not serious? So, what do we do now? Our people should become intelligent in the treatment of the sick without the aid of poisonous drugs. Many should seek to obtain the education that will enable them to combat disease in its various forms by the most simple methods. Thousands have gone down to the grave because of the use of poisonous drugs who might have been restored to health by simple methods of treatment. So what do? We need to become intelligent in the treatment of sickness without the aid of poisonous drugs. So we need to study physiology. How does the body work? People need to be taught that drugs do not cure disease. It is true that they sometimes afford present relief, and the patient appears to recover as a result of their use. This is because nature has sufficient vital forces to expel the poisons and to correct the conditions that cause the disease. But in most cases, the drug only changes the form and location of the disease. Often the effects of the poison seems to be overcome for time, but the results remain in the system and works great harm some later period. Let them pray for the sick, ministering to their necessities, not with drugs, but with nature's remedies, and teaching them how to regain health and avoiding disease. We need to teach lifestyle to people. That's how we address this issue. Thousands need and would gladly receive instruction concerning the simple methods of treating the sick, methods that are taking the place of the use of poisonous drugs. And it is true. There are so many people out there who want to know. They're tired of the side effects. They're tired of the cost. They're tired of the donut hole. Just tell me, what do I need to do? They want to know. But we have to know to be able to tell them. Our goal is not to remove drugs. Our goal is to point the sin-sick soul to Christ. If they get better, such as the gentleman that had vancomycin-resistant staph, and he was told that only God would heal him, he then believed in God. His wife now believes in God. Drugs not recommended. You are not justified in advocating one school above the others, as if it were the only one worthy of respect. Those who vindicate one school of medicine and bitterly condemn another are actuated by the zeal that is not according to knowledge. The use of drugs has resulted in far more harm than good, and should our physicians who claim to believe in the truth almost entirely dispense with medications and faithfully practice along with the line of hygiene, using nature's remedies, far greater success would attend their efforts. There is no need whatsoever to exalt the method whereby drugs are administered. I know whereof I speak. Brethren of the medical profession, I entreat you to think candidly and put away childish things. They resort to drugs when greater skill and knowledge would teach them the more excellent way. And look what we're reading from Loma Linda Messages. And I'll conclude with this. Again, going back to this. Be very careful. as you listen to this program today, do not just throw your drugs and your medications in the garbage. Do not throw your parents' medications in the garbage. You need to learn the cause of what the sickness is. And as you change that, the body starts coming back to normal. Work with your physician as it comes back to normal to use less and less dosing. When physicians understand physiology in its truest sense, their use of drugs will be very much less, and finally, they will cease to use them at all. The physician who depends upon drug medications in his practice shows that he does not understand the delicate machinery of the human organism. If he insists on not making changes, it shows that he refuses to go understand that physiology to its truest sense so that he can get to here. Y'all, this is a promise. Y'all, this is a promise. If we study physiology, we can get to here. God would not tell us to do something if He will not show us how to do it. So I encourage you, medical missionaries, study. Doctors, nurses, study physiology more than you study pharmacology. Shall we pray? Our dear Heavenly Father, it's so clear. Just as you've told us what true education is, unfortunately we have ignored it. You have showed us what true health is. Again, we have ignored it. Just as we have ignored true education, we are getting the consequences. Just as we have ignored true health, we are getting the consequences. Lord, give us a desire to make a change. Give us a desire to obey. And Lord, give us the knowledge of what we need to do. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.